The Spanish Decadence. The Spanish decadence was the gradual process of exhaustion and fatigue suffered by the Spanish monarchy throughout the 17th century, during the reigns of the minor Habsburgs, the last kings of the Habsburg dynasty, Philip II, Philip IV, and Charles II of Spain. This crisis occurred along with the general crisis of the 17th century, but it was particularly serious in Spain, to such a point that Spain stopped being the largest economy in the 16th century and became an impoverished and peripheral country. The aforementioned decline was reflected in all these areas. Demographically, the population was greatly reduced because of pests and plagues that occurred in this century. Economically, with chronic fiscal problems, monetary changes, inflation, and the slump in payments for precious metals coming from America. Socially, maintaining a high religious weight, heavily influenced by the Spanish Inquisition, the expulsion of Moors from Spain, increased presence of religious orders, and the picaresque. Politically, the disastrous policies of the Duke of Lerma and the Count Duke of Olivares, favourites of Kings Philip III and Philip IV respectively. The Succession War. When the last Habsburg died without descendants, the War of Succession began, until it ended with the Treaty of Utrecht, which split the Spanish territories up between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons, with a fair few benefits for England, since that treaty gave possession of Gibraltar and Minorca to England. On the other hand, the Spanish decline coincided with the greatest displays of art and culture in what has been referred to as the Spanish Golden Age. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, there was a great development of art and culture in Spain. The monarch became patrons of architects, painters, and sculptors. Art in all its forms came to the fore during this time, with the work of Miguel de Cervantes, López de Vega, and Calderón de la Barca, among others in literature, and the likes of Velázquez, El Greco, Murillo, Rivera, Zurbarán in the world of art. The loss of the American colonies. The independence process of the American colonies is dated between 1810 and 1825, but its history actually goes back to the 18th century. This process was quite complex because of diversity of political, economic, and social situations, the dynamic of Spanish and Latin American relations, the involvement of third parties, the influence of the liberal ideology, the discredit of monarchical forms of government, especially the incompetence and ineptitude of Charles IV and Fernando VII. In the 18th century, the discontent of the Spanish colonial population, particularly the Creole elites, sparked the separatist movement. The Board of Buenos Aires was the first to declare its independence in May 1810, following the movements of Venezuela, Chile, Paraguay, and Mexico. During the period from 1814 to 1819, the united action of the independence movement under the command of Simon Bolivar, José San Martín, and José Antonio Sucre gave the movement efficiency and solidarity. Furthermore, military and financial aid from the United Kingdom was very important for the development of events. From Argentina, San Martín occupied Chile, and Bolivar conquered Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador. Meanwhile, the Spanish monarchy had financial problems, and discontent grew among the Spanish army officers in the Americas. In 1820, the expedition that should have left to the Americas revolted in Cabezas de San Juan. Led by General Rafael del Riego, this favoured independence efforts even more on the other side of the world. In 1821, New Spain, nowadays Mexico, and Guatemala declared independence. Peru was also lost in the Battle of Ayacucho, 1824, and the last loyal Spanish garrisons of Callao and Chiloé surrendered in 1826. In the late 19th century, Spain had a deep crisis that was triggered by the colonial wars of independence in Cuba, 1895 to 1898, and the Philippines, 1896 to 1898. The origin of the conflict was the inadequate Spanish colonial policy, along with US expansionist interests. Cuba was a Spanish colony to which Spain had strong emotional ties. They were the last remains of the great empire, and many Cuban people descended from Spaniards. There were also strong economic interests. Cuba was the world's largest exporter of sugar and also was an important producer of coffee and tobacco. Several revolts broke out in Cuba with the aim of getting independence from Spain. The leader of the Cuban independence movement was José Martín, politician and writer, Cuban but son of a Spaniard. Among the Spanish political forces, there were three different positions. The Unionist, defended by the two regiments' political parties which considered Cuba as Spanish territory. The Autonomist, who wanted to have some level of autonomy granted. This stance was defended by the Liberal Party. And lastly, independence, accepted by the Republicans, but another vital factor came into play, the United States. Basically, economic reasons along with geographical interests motivated the United States' intervention in the conflict. The USA wanted military control of the Caribbean Sea and Central America. The pretext for the US declaration of war to Spain was the bombing of the US battleship Maine, docked in the port of Havana. The Maine was bombed and sank in the harbour waters. Who was responsible? Was it an accident or sabotage? There wasn't much evidence, and the US Commission attributed responsibility to the Spanish government. On the 25th of April 1898, the US Congress formally declared war on Spain. The military conflict caused the loss of the Spanish Navy, and meanwhile in the Philippines, efforts for independence were also made, led by José Rizal, a novelist and founder of the Liga Filipina. However, the uprising was brutally suppressed, and their leader was executed by firing squad. But eventually, with the Spanish army defeated, the conflict was brought to an end in December 1898 with the Treaty of Paris, and Puerto Rico, the Philippines and Guam were ceded to the United States, while Cuba became independent but under US protection.